Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this Microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Juvenile Instructor from February 15th, 1866. So, we are continuing our series on the Juvenile Instructor. So far, we've read the first three. This is number 4. Yeah, I am looking forward to it, so let's just jump right in. Poetry. Juvenile Evening Hymn by E.R. Snow. Okay, the last one by Eliza R. Snow was very preachy, yeah? So let's see what this one's about. Our Heavenly Father, we will sing to Thee a hymn of praise. Accept our evening offering and hear our childish lays. If in that day that's past and gone we did Thy Spirit grieve, we in the name of Thy dear Son do pray Thou wilt forgive. We thank Thee for the tender care that watched life's infant thread, else we had now been sleeping where the tombstone marks the dead. Jeez. We thank Thee for the food we eat and for the clothes we wear. We thank Thee that our pulses beat in this pure mountain air. Okay. And when we lay us down to rest, we pray Thee safely keep, and through this night may we be blessed with sweet refreshing sleep. And when the morn salutes the skies with life and vigor blessed, may we with gratitude arise and thank Thee for our rest. We praise Thy name that we were born in days when prophets live, and pray that we may never scorn the counsels they shall give. Prolong our lives in righteousness, the path of life to tread, and in Thy kingdom work to bless the living and the dead. Okay, that was a bit intense. Yeah. So saying that was preachy is putting it mildly. I mean, geez. It's like, thank you for my pulse beating. You know, I mean, there is a point to that, and obviously this is a religious publication, but like, that's a bit much. We're talking to children, you know? Children, be grateful you are alive, because you could be dead. That's a bit much. I'm just saying. Anyways, alright. Moving on. Biography, Joseph Smith the Prophet. Alright, we described the conversation of the messenger to Joseph in the last number. Before that conversation was ended, and while the messenger was yet talking about the plates, Joseph saw in vision the place where they were buried. It was shown to him so clearly that he knew the place again when he afterwards went there. When the messenger had done speaking, the light in the room began to gather around him, and a moment when the room was left dark except around him, Joseph saw a channel or passage open right up into heaven, and the messenger ascended up until he entirely disappeared. The room was then left as it was before, the heavenly light filled it. This heavenly messenger visited Joseph twice more during the night and repeated each time that which he had told him during his first visit to him. Besides, he had told him about great judgments which were coming upon the earth, with famine, war, and sickness, and that those grievous things would come on the earth in this generation. Joseph himself and his father's family were poor, and the messenger warned him that Satan would try and tempt him to get the plates, with a view to become rich through them. He said to Joseph that he must have no other object in view in getting the plates than to glorify God, and no other motive but to build up God's kingdom, or he could not get the plates. It was nearly daylight when the messenger left him the third time. His conversations with Joseph had lasted through the whole night. We see by this how necessary it was that Joseph should be fully taught by the Lord before he commenced the great work that the Lord had for him to do. When Joseph went to his labor the next day as usual, he found that he could not work as he did at other times. His strength had left him. His father, who was with him, saw that he was weak, and told him to go home. In trying to cross a fence on his way to the house, his strength entirely left him, and he fell helpless to the ground, and for a time was unconscious of anything. The first thing he recollected when he came to himself was a voice calling him by name. He looked up and saw the same heavenly messenger standing over his head, surrounded by light as before. Once more he related to Joseph all that he had told him the previous night, and he told him to go to his father and tell him of the vision and commandments he had received. Joseph obeyed the messenger and returned to his father in the field and told him all. His father did not feel as others had about his vision. He did not mock him and tell him that the things which he had heard were of the devil, but he told Joseph that which he had been shown unto him was of God, and to go and do as the messenger had commanded. Joseph then went to the place where he had been shown the plates were buried. He knew the place the moment he saw it, as it had been shown to him in vision. The plates were buried in a hill close to the village of Manchester, Ontario County, New York, where Joseph then lived. This hill was called Cumorah by the Nephites and Ramah by the Jaredites, so the Book of Mormon informs us. The plates were in a stone box, the top of which, being rounding, could be seen above the ground in the center. When Joseph had removed the earth from around the stone which covered the box, he raised it up with a lever, and looked into the box, and there beheld the plates, and Urim and Thummim, and the breastplate. What a glorious privilege was this for Joseph to enjoy! For 1400 years these precious things had remained concealed from the sight or knowledge of men. By the command of the Lord they had been buried, and by his power they had been kept until now. They were shown to Joseph. How thankful this boy must have felt to the Lord for listening to his prayers and accepting his faith and granting unto him as great favors as he had received. Upon seeing the plates and other things, Joseph stretched out his hand to take them out, but the messenger forbade him, and told him that the time for bringing them forth had not yet arrived. He told Joseph that 4 years must pass away before they could be obtained, and that he would have to come to that place precisely in 1 year from that time, and he would meet him there, and that he would do this every year until the 4 years should be ended. On the 22nd of September each year, Joseph went there as he had been directed, and always found the same messenger there to meet him. At those meetings, Joseph received much instruction about the things the Lord was going to do, and also the manner in which his kingdom was to be conducted. On the morning of the 22nd of September, 1827, the messenger delivered the plates into his hands. We wish our little readers to understand that the plates which the heavenly messenger gave unto Joseph were of gold, and were covered with writing, engraved or cut upon them. They were buried in the ground about 420 years after the birth of Jesus by a prophet whose name was Moroni. He hid them where they kept them from the wicked. That book which you now call the Book of Mormon was translated from those plates. It was arranged and written by the hand of Mormon. Mormon was a prophet of God and the father of Moroni. Before his death, he committed the plates to Moroni. To be continued. Once again, it's pretty much verbatim taken from Joseph Smith History, although I did understand that when he went to see the plates the first time, the reason he couldn't get them was because the first thought he had when he saw gold was how much it cost. Yeah, it was all about the money. It was about hey, I could help my family, I could buy this or that with it. And that's not the point of the Book of Mormon, and that's why he wasn't allowed to get them immediately, because the angel told him, I told you the first thing, you have to only think about the kingdom of God. If you are going to be greedy, then you can't have them. And I think that that's why he had to come every year and look at it again, and every time it was a measure of what's the first thing in your heart. Are you ready to only be thinking about what's on them instead of what they're made of? Yeah? And I think that that's just my opinion. Anyways. Okay. The bear. Ooh, let's learn about bears. That's a very fuzzy picture. I'm sure it was better in real life, in person, before it was faded over multiple hundreds of years. Okay. Some of our young readers may have seen bears, for they are found in the mountains which surround these valleys, and sometimes they come down into the valleys where it is dangerous to meet them. Oh, are there still some there? Alexa, are there bears in Utah?
According to an Alexa Answers contributor, yes, there are bears in Utah, including southern Utah.
Okay, there still are. Okay, good to know. But the bears that are seen here are not the same as the one in the illustration. It is a black bear, and it is found on various parts of the continent called North America. There are various kinds of bears. The white and polar bear is found away in the frozen north, often on large masses of ice. It is very large and very ferocious. Yes, I've heard that. It's like the worst one to possibly meet. Yet it shows great attachment to its young and is very affectionate with its mates. The brown bear is another variety and is found in the northern parts of Europe and America. There are several other varieties of bears in different parts of the earth, but none of them are more dangerous than the kind that is in these mountains, which is called the grizzly bear. It is very large, ferocious, and difficult to kill. Some of our brethren have been killed by grizzly bears, particularly in Cache Valley. Ooh, jeez. And great care has to be taken when going to places where they are likely to be found. to be well armed and prepared for them. The following story about the white bear will, we hope, be interesting. While the Carcase frigate, a number of years ago, was locked in the ice away in the north, 3 bears were seen coming toward the ship one morning on the ice. They proved to be a she-bear and her 2 cubs, but the cubs were nearly as large as the dam. The ship's crew threw great lumps of the flesh of a seahorse upon the ice. A seahorse? Which the old bear carried away singly, laying every lump before her cubs as she brought it, and dividing it, gave each a share, keeping but a small portion for herself. As she was fetching away the last piece, the sailors shot both the cubs dead and wounded her, but not mortally. Though she could but just crawl to the place where they lay, she carried the lump of flesh she had fetched away, and laid it before them, and when she saw they would not eat, she laid her paws upon the first one, and then upon the other, and tried to raise them up, moaning piteously. When she found they would not stir, she went off some distance and looked back moaning. Finding they did not follow her, she returned, and smelling around them, began to lick their wounds. She crawled off a few paces a second time, looked behind her, and stood moaning. Seeing they did not follow her, she returned again, and with signs of great fondness went round pawing them and moaning. At last she raised her head towards the ship and uttered a growl of despair. When the sailors shot her, she fell between her cubs and died licking their wounds. That is horrendously heartrending. Like, what the flip? Why are they telling small children this? Like, you should tell children to be careful of bears because they're very dangerous, and what to do if you ever meet one. Not, like, pitiful, sad stories about polar bears licking their dead children's wounds. Like, that's just creepy. Ugh. Okay, that's a little much for me. Okay, moving on. Be satisfied. There are some little folks who are very fond of thinking that everybody else is better off than they are. The little boy fancies that all his playmates have better toys and playthings that he has. The little girl envies her friends and fancies that every new doll or dress or hat that they have is either prettier or bigger or better in some way or other than what she has. Then they fret or get sullen and make themselves unhappy and cross about it, which is very foolish, as it does them no good, and does not make their friends and parents, nor God their Father in heaven, love them any better. But perhaps they, by being naughty and disagreeable, make others cross and unhappy as well. While if they were contented with what they had, they would be cheerful and happy all the time, and people would love them and say what good little children they are. Now it is very often all fancy and not true, that others have better toys and dolls and other fine things than you have. Perhaps they may think the same of you, and be angry because you have some things that they have not. This puts me in mind of a little story told me by a lady who lives in this valley. When she was a very little girl, she used to like to peep into the looking-glass, and see the image or reflection in the glass of what was in the room she was in. And what do you think she fancied? That she was looking through a kind of window into another room, and she used to want to get into that other room so badly, for she thought that she could see such pretty nice things there that she had not in the room that she was in. When she grew older, she found that the very things she wanted were just the things that she had, and what she saw in the looking-glass was only the copy of what was in her mother's own room. You may think she was a silly little girl for not knowing better, but I am afraid a great many of us are very much like her, and would find that the things that they sometimes fret for are no better than the things they already possess. It is much better to be satisfied with what we have than to always be wishing for what we cannot get, as when obtained, we would often find we had not gained much by the addition. Then, boys and girls, learn to be contented with what you have, and strive to be loved and respected and happy all the day long. R. Yeah, that's a good point. I do appreciate that perspective of looking in a mirror and saying, oh, look what a nice place it is on the other side, when you don't realize that it's actually the same as what's on your side, yeah? I like that. The cup that is full will hold no more. Keep your hearts full of good thoughts, that bad ones may not find room to enter. That's not true. Absolutely not true. Because you have many good thoughts doesn't mean that you can't have intruding bad thoughts ever. That absolutely happens. In fact, it's quite common. Anyway, if you mean to be happy when old, be temperate when you were young. Yeah, okay, I like that. Don't become an alcoholic. Yeah. An ocean steamship. This is a picture of a steamship built to sail upon the seas and oceans, to go from one distant land to another and carry passengers and freight. No doubt many of my little readers of the Instructor will yet sail upon vessels like these in our picture, to foreign lands as missionaries, to carry the gospel to people and nations that have not heard it, and we hope they will so conduct themselves when they are boys that when they become young men, if any missionaries should be wanted, nobody can object to them and say they're unfit to go. The apostles and elders who live now have great advantages over those who lived in former days, in being able to travel swiftly by the aid of steam on land and water. They can now travel thousands of miles in a very short space of time, and go to the most distant nations and tell them the good news that God has spoken from the heavens and restored his church again, and spend but a little time on the journey. In the days of your grandfathers this could not be done. Some of your fathers can probably recollect when the first railroad was built to carry passengers. It was God who led men to make these discoveries, that his great work might be accomplished quickly. Our little readers can learn about Noah's Ark, the first vessel of which we have any account that was ever built, in the 6th and 7th chapters of Genesis. They can also read in the Book of Mormon about vessels the Lord commanded his servants to build to cross great oceans in. In the 5th chapter of the first book of Nephi, 41st and 42nd pages, we can read about Nephi's ship, and in the first chapter of the book of Ether, 518th and 519th pages, we can read about the 8 vessels built by the brother of Jared. We are told in the Book of Mormon how those vessels were moved, but the ships of early times were generally moved through the water by men rowing with oars. Some of the old warships were moved with 50 oars, but others had on one vessel as many as 5 tiers or platforms, one above another, on which 300 rowers sat to pull with their oars. But the most of these vessels in those days were small, and could not sail very fast. Even as late as 1492, 2 of the ships in which Columbus crossed the great ocean to discover America were only 50 tons burthen, and had no decks, and were moved by oars and sails. How different to the vessels of these days! Those which now cross the Atlantic are like floating palaces, and are fitted up with almost every convenience that can be obtained on land. Robert Fulton, an American engineer, was the first man who successfully used steam for running a passenger and freight vessel. Others had tried it before him, but they were not successful. His boat ran on the Hudson River between New York City and Albany in the year 1807. In the year 1819, the Savannah, also an American vessel, 300 tons burthen, crossed from New York to Liverpool in 26 days. She was the first steamship which ever crossed the ocean, and she returned the same year. What a small vessel she would be alongside of the Great Eastern, the largest steamship ever built. You will perhaps understand when we tell you that she is 24,360 tons burthen and 32 feet longer than one of the blocks in the Great Salt Lake. Steamships can now cross from New York to Liverpool in 9 days and a few hours. This brief description of this important invention should lead you to read more about it and to talk with your parents and others about ships. That's really interesting to me, like to read today as like, oh, they're floating palaces today. This was 1866. I don't consider the ships of 1866 to be floating palaces. Do you? I mean, you think of even the Titanic, which was built in 1912 and had its maiden voyage, was like considered really fancy and had a lot of really cool things in it. And I'm sure it did. It was also considered really big compared to the largest ships of today, which are so much larger. It's so very interesting to look back and to think, like, you know, back then they thought that they had reached like the most modern of all things and the most wonderful of all things. They just had no vision of the future. And so placing that upon myself again, I also have no vision of the future. I wonder what they will look like in another 100 years. If the largest ships will still be the largest ships, or the most luxurious ships will still be the most luxurious ships, or the fastest ships will still be the fastest ships, you know? Or will there be like some seriously great strides being made? Now faster I think will happen, but the rest I don't know. A word to little girls. Who is lovely? Is it that little girl who drops sweet words, kind remarks, and pleasant smiles as she passes along, who has a kind word of sympathy for every girl or boy she meets in trouble, and a kind hand to help her companions out of difficulty, who never scowls, never contends, never teases her mates, nor seeks in any other way to diminish, but always to increase their happiness? Would it not please you to pick up a string of pearls, drops of gold, diamonds, and precious stones as you pass along the streets? But these are the true pearls and precious stones which can never be lost. Take the hand of friendliness, smile on the sad and dejected, sympathize with those in trouble, strive everywhere to diffuse around you sunshine and joy. If you do this, you will be loved. Yeah? Dr. Doddridge one day asked his little girl why it was that everybody loved her. I know not, she replied, unless it be that I love everybody. I like that. This is the true secret of being beloved. He that hath friends, says Solomon, must show himself friendly. Love begets love. If you love others, they cannot help loving you. So then, do not put a scowl and complain that nobody loves you. If nobody loves you, it is your own fault. Either you do not make yourself lovely by a sweet winning temper and kind winning ways, or you do not love those of whom you complain. Anecdotes of girls. That doesn't only apply to girls, first of all. Second of all, I agree with a lot of this, except for some of it. Not all. So, who never scowls, never contends. Like you never scowl, like you never have a bad day. People are allowed to have bad days. It's okay. Never contends. I am not a particularly confrontational person, but I don't think that anybody would describe me as someone who never contends, because I very much stand up for myself if I feel like my rights are being trampled upon. And I think that everyone should be like that, to be able to stand up for themselves if they are able to. Obviously there are moments where that's not possible, but I think that in general that needs to be something that someone can do. Anyways. Yes, you will be loved if you love. Yeah. Love begets love. I do agree with that, but not contending isn't necessarily a sign of love. Yeah. It's a sign of, it can be a sign of giving up. Yeah. All right. A noble boy. A touching incident occurred at a steamboat sinking in the Missouri River near St. Louis. Among the persons who were swept overboard were a woman and a boy about 12 years of age. A man on the steamer, seeing the boy buffeting the waves just beyond the boat, threw him a rope and called to him to take hold of it. The little fellow replied, "Never mind me, I can swim. Save Mama." They were both saved. That is a wonderful story, actually. Let's think of the ones who need more help than we do, yeah? And I'm very glad that boy could swim. All right. The boy who would be sociable. Oh, Joe, why can't you take a drink and be sociable? What's the use of being so prudish? One drink won't hurt you. The speaker's name was Jacob. He was a boy just emerging from boyhood into manhood, and one whom he addressed was about the same age. They were in company with a number of other young men who were passing a bottle around, which, to judge by the smell and the wry faces they all made when they sucked it, contained something stronger than water. It contained whiskey. The young man who tried to persuade the other to drink was not in the habit of drinking liquor himself, but he was of a sociable, accommodating disposition, and when in the company of boys whose society he liked, if they drank whiskey and pressed him to join them, he would not refuse. It would be unsociable to do so. These two boys whom we have named were intimate companions and friends, and were fond of one another's society. They were strong in the faith, were deeply attached to their religion, and were proud of being Latter-day Saints, and both were desirous of becoming useful and reliable men. On one point only would they have any difference of feeling. Joe would not drink liquor, not even when his companions, whom he loved very much, called him unsociable for not doing so. But Jacob thought there was no harm in drinking occasionally. He did not care about liquor, he said, but then he liked to be sociable when he was with the boys, and the boys thought him a good fellow. They were fond of his society. He was so smart and talented, and was not so religious that he could not drink whiskey and have a good time once in a while. Poor Joe felt sometimes, when in their society, that he was in the way, and that they did not like him as well as they would have done had he drank with them. But he could not help it. He had chosen his course, and he would not change it, even if he lost the friendship of his companions, for he had never forgotten the teachings of his mother, and the word of God, that it was wrong to drink liquor, and that it was not proper in the sight of the Lord. Time wore on, and the boys became men. Joe still abstained from drinking, but Jacob found that instead of drinking now to be sociable, he drank it for its taste, for he had grown to like it very much, and for the effect it had upon him. He had gone home drunk a number of times, to the great grief of his family and his own shame. It soon began to be whispered about that Jacob was a constant drinker, and then people who knew him said to one another when his name was mentioned, "What a pity that young man, who might be so useful, should fall into such a dreadful habit." His friends pleaded with him and told him that he must quit his drinking or he would ruin himself, but he had gone too far. The habit he was formed was his master, and he sank under it and became a drunkard. Boys, this is a true story. Be warned by it. The Indians in the East call liquor the white man's firewater. It sets men's and boys' brains on fire when they drink it. No matter if your companion should think you unsociable because you will not drink, never mind. Be firm, and refuse, and put such stuff in your mouths. Never drink the first glass or drink. No boy who wishes to be a faithful Latter-day Saint will trust himself to drink the first glass. It's interesting that these two stories are back to back. So we had the one about girls being kind and sweet to everybody, yeah? And then the boy who would be sociable. Like, this is very much a dichotomy here, because in boys it is held up that it's best to stick to your convictions and not give in to peer pressure, whereas with girls it's like, do give in to peer pressure, be kind and sociable, a kind hand to help out her companions out of difficulty, who never scowls, never contends, never teases her mates, nor seeks in any way to diminish, but always to increase their happiness. So if someone came to you with a bottle of alcohol and was pressuring you to take it, then what they just said to the little girl would pressure her also to take it. You're asking a girl to conform, whereas you're asking a boy to stand up and be assertive and strong. I really don't like that. I wish that they were telling all children, yes, be kind to each other, but also stand up for what you believe in. You don't have to participate in whatever it is that they're doing. So I think that these two stories are completely in contrast to each other. Interesting to see that from a modern perspective, isn't it? All right, voices from nature. 4, the microscope. Okay, microscope is not from nature. I'm just pointing it out. It can see nature better. Maybe that's what they're talking about. Okay, from the time that Christopher Columbus discovered a new world, the work of discovery went on until almost every spot on the earth became more or less known to man. What the flip are they talking about? Who, finding little left on our planet to discover, turned his searching eye upward to the starry heavens. Okay, also not done by microscope, and assisted by skillfully contrived instruments, opened another world to his admiring gaze. New suns appeared before him. He followed their motions. Whole universes were seen stretched out in the far-off space. He tried to calculate their distance. New wonders revealed themselves, and he felt his littleness before the majesty and power of the Almighty Being, who created and rules them according to his pleasure. Another world was yet left undiscovered, more manifold than the one Columbus found, and no less marvelous, and immense than that which the telescope reveals to us over our heads. It is beneath, around, above and around us. It is the bread we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the ground we cultivate, and the flowers we love. It has created continents and destroyed the mighty works of human skill. No railroad or steamboat leads us to it, but wherever we are, we can behold some of its beauties through the microscope. Okay, finally got to our topic here. That's a long introduction, you know. As this continent was hidden from the knowledge of man until by the decree of God the time had arrived, yeah, sure it has, it should be peopled by the Gentiles, so commenced the great discoveries of astronomy about the same time. And finally also the microscope was invented only 100 years after Columbus, in the year 1590. The children of Zachariah Jansen, a spectacle maker in Holland, it is said, Jansen, brought in their play 2 glass lenses accidentally together, and saw to their astonishment a great many things which they could not discern with the naked eye. The almost simultaneous opening of these new worlds, of 3 new worlds to the knowledge and research of man, is a most significant fact. No, it's not. and is one of the most undeniable testimonies by which the great king of the world shows that he rules and controls the course of events and the destinies of the human race. What the flip are you talking about? No, the only connection there is between the telescope and the microscope, and that's because they're very similar. It's just basically a magnifying lens, like flipped backwards, I think it is, to the telescope versus the microscope. But in the end, they're both doing the same thing. They're just focusing on different things, you know? So, like, the picture that you're looking at from the microscope needs to be blown up, like, way bigger, whereas we're looking through a telescope, what you're trying to see is something clearly far off. But you're also making it bigger, yeah? I mean, from the naked eye, it would be, like, quarter-sized, and then you blow it up to be, like, the size of, like a globe, you know, something big. Anyway, so yeah, those two are related. What the heck does it have to do with discoveries of continents? Because now our maps are better? Like, it has nothing to do with it. It's completely unrelated, and I don't know why they put those together. It's really weird. Okay. There are a few grains of salt. Look at them through the microscope and behold the beautiful crystallization of each particle, every side as smoothly polished as no artist with its finest instruments could accomplish. Well, they could, just not on that scale. Yeah. Here I tried to catch a butterfly, but it escapes me and left some colored dust off of its wings on my finger. The microscope tells me that this dust is composed of hundreds of little stars, balls, and fans of every description. Sure. Here is a piece of moldy bread. Look at it through the microscope. What do you see? A whole forest of large trees resembling palms, bearing fruit like grapes, shrubbery of great variety, with flowers of beautiful form and color, and, oh horror, monstrous snakes crawling between them. Now let us finally watch that drop of water through our glass. It is yet clear and pure, but do you see at this place a little speck? It begins to move. It swims around, it bursts, and an animal with a large head like that of a crocodile, with feet and a long tail come out. That's disgusting. If that's in my water, I'm going to throw up. There have some more animals of various forms and shapes made their appearance in the meanwhile in other regions of this world, and we see them now shooting to and fro in all directions, devouring one another, multiplying themselves and dying as soon as the drop dries up. A true picture of this great world of ours. Now think a moment, my young readers. Those animals, for instance, which we saw in the drop of water, have organs to move, to eat, and to breathe, and for all the functions of the animal body. How small their limbs be, or on or in them perhaps live other little animals, which again must have organs, and these again perhaps are peopled in the similar way. Where is the end? Is the power of the Almighty more manifest in the glorious firmament above us, with its myriads of stars, than it is in the drop of water with its living population, or among the multitudes of creatures that by thousands may swim at once through the eye of the finest cambric needle? Who has, Eternal One, seen the beginning of thy greatness, or understood the principle of thy wisdom? For the heavens declare thy glory, and the drop of water proclaims thy power with 1,000 tongues. KGM, that's Carl G. Mazer. I am really disgusted by this thought. I'm guessing that the water wasn't filtered very well back then, 1866, and so they just drank it with all of its little bugs and stuff. That's really gross. I'm really glad we have filtered water now that doesn't have bugs in it. Ugh. That's so disgusting. Ugh. Okay. You had to put that thought in my head, did you, Carl G. Mazer? Oh my gosh. Ugh. Okay. The Indians. Okay, these I first thought was going to be very racist, but it turns out that they are just Book of Mormon stories. I really wish they had given this the title Book of Mormon stories instead of the Indians. Anyways. Nephi's second visit to Jerusalem. After having obtained the plates as described in the previous chapter, Nephi and his brothers, accompanied by Zoram, returned to their parents, who were overjoyed to see them, having feared from their long absence that something had happened to them. They remained together a short time, enjoying each other's society, offering sacrifices to the Lord for their deliverance, and recruiting their strength, after which they returned once more to Jerusalem by the command of God, to bring down Ishmael and his family, so that Lehi's sons might have wives to be able to raise up children. On arriving at Jerusalem, Nephi and his brothers visited Ishmael and told him what the Lord had said to their father, and how they had come by the command of God to ask him to leave Jerusalem and accompany them on their journey to the land to which God designed to lead them. The Lord softened the hearts of Ishmael and his household so that they believed the words of Nephi and his brethren and consented to go with them. Ishmael's family consisted of himself and wife, 2 married sons and their families, and 5 daughters. As they were all traveling towards the place where Lehi and his family were encamped in the wilderness, Laman and Lemuel, with 2 of the daughters of Ishmael and 2 sons of their families, rebelled against Nephi and Ishmael, and wanted to return to Jerusalem. Nephi, being a good young man who loved God and desired to keep his commandments, was very much grieved at the wickedness of his brothers, and part of Ishmael's family in wanting to go back to Jerusalem, after God had been so kind as to tell them of and provide a way for them to escape the great calamities that were coming upon the Jews, in the destruction of their beautiful city and their own captivity into Babylon. Nephi therefore talked to them very earnestly, and asked them how they could think of being so wicked and rebellious against God, that they were even seen an angel during their former visit to Jerusalem, and knew that God had spoken to their father Lehi. But, said Nephi, if you are determined to go back, go, but remember that you will perish with the rest of the inhabitants of Jerusalem. When Nephi had done speaking, his brothers were very angry with him and sought to kill him. So they took him and bound him with strong cords, and were going to leave him for wild beasts to devour. But Nephi prayed to God, and it gave him strength to burst the cords with which he was bound. And he stood forth free and talked to his brothers again. They were more angry, however, than before, and again sought to take away his life. But one of the daughters of Ishmael and her mother, and also one of the Ishmael's sons, pleaded with Laman and Lemuel until their hearts were softened, and they humbled themselves before their brother Nephi, being very sorrowful for their wickedness towards him, and begged him to forgive them. Nephi at once frankly forgave them, and exhorted them to pray to God for his forgiveness. After this they traveled in peace and unity until they reached the place where Lehi was camped, having brought with them all kinds of seeds that they were acquainted with, both fruit and of grain, and they did not forget their sacrifices to the Lord, and to thank him for having taken care of them during their journey. Thus we see that besides Lehi's family there was a family of Ishmael, and the servant of Laban named Zoram, who were, in reality, the forefathers of the present Indians, but they all became members of Lehi's family, he being the head, and as we shall learn in the course of our story, were divided into 2 principal branches of people, known as the Nephites and Lamanites. Basically came directly from the Book of Mormon. Not even going to really comment on it. Okay. Canaling. Canals are channels cut or dug in the earth to hold water. They are principally used for what is called inland navigation, that is, bearing ships or other vessels on the surface of the water inland. And canals are usually made for this purpose where there are no rivers, deep or broad enough to be navigated, running in the direction in which it is desired to take the vessels. On these vessels, freight and passengers are carried from one part of the country to the other, and it appears strange in places to see them moving along with sails spread through a green meadow, looking from a distance as if they were sailing over the grass. For the canals, being dug by man, with sides firmly built to keep them from washing away, have not the nice shelving banks and windings that rivers usually have. Some canals are very long and broad and deep, and vessels of considerable size can go along in them. Of this class, one is known as the Caledonian Canal in Scotland, although it is not as long as some, being 60 miles and a half long, which joins together a number of small lakes, or locks as they are called in that country, and by which vessels can go from sea on one side of Scotland to the sea on the other side without having to sail around the land. The Erie Canal on this continent is a very extensive one, and a great deal of freight is carried on it. Other canals in this country, in Great Britain, in Holland, and in many other places are worthy of writing about if we had space, but our readers must seek for books containing information in this and other subjects, and study them to gain knowledge. Perhaps one of the most important canals in the world is one made not long since across the Isthmus of Suez, between Asia and Africa. Although only a little over 70 miles long, it is important because it unites 2 great oceans by water, the Atlantic Ocean through the Mediterranean Sea with the Indian Ocean through the Arabian Sea. Canal boats are sometimes moved along with sails, sometimes by horses hauling them, and sometimes by men. This last is the way the canal boat in our illustration is being moved. There is usually a road along one side called a low path on which the horses and men walk. The canal boats are made to go up hills on the canals by what are called locks. A short distance from each other, strong gates are put in, which, when shut, keep the water from running down the incline. and when a boat going up the canal passes through one of these open gates it is shut, and a slide on the above one is opened, by which the water is allowed to pass through. The water, being held by the gate that is shut, soon rises in the canal to a level with what is above, which is being lowered at the same time, and when it is level on both sides of the gate above, that gate can be opened by the boat passed through. By this means canals are carried over roads, the water being held up and carried along in what are called aqueduct bridges. The word aqueduct meaning waterway, from two Latin words aqua, water, and ductus, a pipe or canal. The word ductus being derived from duco, to lead. These aqueduct bridges are mostly built of rock and cement. Would you not think it strange to walk along the road and passing under a bridge, know that vessels were sailing over your heads? This is so in some places, one of which is Port Dundas, near Glasgow in Scotland. There are several canals in this territory, but the most important one is now being made in this valley, which is designed to carry water from the River Jordan and Utah Lake up to this city, both for the purpose of navigation and irrigation. We would like to write much more about canals, for it is a very interesting subject, but our readers can ask and read about them, and they will learn a great deal that is instructive and interesting. That is interesting, and I was not aware that there was a canal in Utah. I am going to look it up to see if it's still being used. Canal in Utah. Utah and Salt Lake Canal, Saratoga Canal, Central Utah Canal. So that's a yes. It is still there, and it appears to still being used. Okay. I did not know that. You learn something new every day, don't you? All right. Little George finds a friend. A true story. In our last notice of little George, we saw him without home and without friends, except such kind strangers as the Lord sent to supply his daily wants. Yeah, that was really sad last time. Let's hope it's a little more upbeat this time. When the deep snow has covered the ground and there are no worms and grubs to be found, the little robin comes tamely hopping and chirping to your door for a few crumbs of bread, which you can well spare. Sometimes he meets with good boys and girls who pity him in his forlorn condition and feed him. Sometimes he meets with cruel boys and girls who set traps for him and throw rocks at him, and persecute him when hunger has driven him to their doors. Little George lived in that kind of a way, and, like the little robins in winter, met with both kind and unkind persons. When the little robin is cruelly driven away in terror from your yards and doorways, he finds food somewhere else. When you will not give him a small bit of the bread which the Lord has given you, he feeds the little robin himself. It was often so with little George. When he could not get food from kind strangers, he would often find money lying in his pathway when he was hungry, and then he would go and buy bread with it. So often was he thus provided for that he learned to trust in God, who never forsook him. Cold autumn had blasted the trees and flowers with its chilly breath. The fallen leaves and naked limbs of trees and bush gave warning of coming winter, and this little friendless boy would have been exposed to much suffering from cold and hunger, but the Lord, his true friend, did not forsake him in his extremity. One day, a kind lady, who had often befriended him, found him playing in the street as usual. She gave him a halfpenny and asked him to go with her. Little George would go anywhere for a halfpenny. In fact, it did not matter to him where he went at any time, for one place was as good to him as another. If it was out of doors, he did not know but that all the world out of doors belonged to him, and was made on purpose for him to play in. He went along with this kind lady, thinking that she was taking him to see a fine show. After passing through a great many streets, they stopped in front of a large building, with fine stone steps and iron railing leading up to the great door, with a great brass plate fastened on it, full of letters, which glistened in the rays of the autumn sun. The door was opened to them, and they went into a dark passage, at the other end of which they came to another door. This second door made little George open his blue eyes with wonder, for he had never seen such a door before. It was covered all over with green flannel, which was nailed to it with large, round-headed brass nails. He could not understand why people should make such a bad use of such nice marbles, which he thought they were, and wished he had them to play with. He looked at his halfpenny which the lady had given him, and thought he would buy them, for he had no idea of riches, which reached beyond a few halfpennies, and did not know that he could get anything he wanted or saw if he had only 1 or 2 halfpennies to get it with. The kind lady knocked upon the second door, and it was opened by a grave-looking gentleman with spectacles. While this gentleman and the lady were talking, little George looked around the room, and was more and more surprised at what he saw, For he saw 5 gentlemen, as he took them to be, sitting upon high 3-legged stools, playing with long feathers upon something white. Uncle George. To be continued. If I'm not mistaken, that this woman eventually brings him to a charitable institution for children. This, by the way, this George D. Watt, who wrote this Uncle George series, was from England. So this is England in the 1810s, maybe. Yeah, I'm just guessing. Maybe it was 20s, but it was a long time ago. So, England back then, how did they treat homeless children? Not great. But they did their best, I guess. Anyway, obviously sitting upon 3-legged stools with long feathers, it's clearly quills, yeah, writing something down. I'm guessing that he had never seen people writing before at this age. Remember, he was very young. He was probably 5. Anyway, it's just a guess, though. I'm not sure exactly how old he was. All right, the Riddler, charade. I am composed of 17 letters. My 1, 2, 7, and 12 is a color. My 2, 11, 5 is a small animal. My 6, 4, 8, and 9 is a mineral. My 10, 7, 12, 3 is only found inland, and yet ships sometimes sail on it. My 14, 11, 6 is a domestic animal. My 12, 15, 9, 3 is a source of much amusement to boys. My whole is a well-known city in Utah. Our young readers are requested to forward answers to the above as early as possible. We will be pleased to receive communications for the Riddler, but in every case the solution must accompany the riddle forwarded. Yeah, that makes sense. Tell me which one you're solving, yeah? I'm not going to solve it, and I'm never going to resolve these, because I want you the opportunity of doing it yourself, if you want to, obviously. So leave your answer in the comment below if you know what is meant by this riddle. Anyways, I thought that might be fun. So this time I feel like it was very religion heavy. It was very much this is what the Lord wants, and there wasn't a single article that didn't talk about God leading something or someone. And I feel like that is, I don't know, it's not doing a disservice, but it's almost is, yeah? It's a little bit fanatical, I guess. I mean, we're talking about canals, for heaven's sake. And you're talking about, God leading the people to do it. You're talking about Nephi going back to, get Ishmael. Sure, talk about it being led by God. But you're talking about the invention of the microscope. Yeah, you think that was... Okay, whatever. I think it's a little bit much is all. I also did not really enjoy this dichotomy of girls be kind, boys stand up for yourself. How about everyone be kind and everyone stand up for yourself, and they are not mutually exclusive? Yeah? That's what I think. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that, though. I hope you found that interesting. I just feel like a lot has changed since 1866, and this kind of periodical would definitely not fly today. It's too much. It's very overly religious and overly preachy, yeah, in a lot of ways. Anyways, but I hope you enjoyed that anyway, and if you did, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.